There is something deeply unsettling about the human mind and its cravings and its desires. All it takes is a sound, an image, a memory, and suddenly the body reacts and awakens as if the experience is already happening. This was discovered a long time ago through a simple experiment, Pavlov's law of classical conditioning. A scientist, Pavlov, observed dogs salivating before food appeared. So they created a neutral stimulus. They rang a bell every time food arrived. The dogs associated the bell with the food, and eventually the mere sound of a bell would trigger the taste of food in the body. The body had learned the association. It is called an unconditioned response, a UCR. And perhaps human beings are not very different. A logo appears on a screen. A notification sound arises. The smell of fried food passes through the air. And immediately the nervous system responds. Hunger appears. Desire appears. Compulsion appears. Because conditioning has been repeated so many times that the reaction has now become automatic. Modern neuroscience confirms that repeated stimuli strengthen neural pathways. The brain becomes efficient at anticipation. The body begins preparing for pleasure before the experience even arrives. This is the first stage of conditioning. Repeated association, a stimulus paired again and again with reward. The ancient meditators observed this too, inwardly, thousands of years ago. They saw that the mind is constantly creating associations. Pleasure becomes linked to objects. Objects become linked to emotional escape. And slowly, consciousness falls asleep inside habit. Watch carefully. Certain addictive behaviors in your own life. A person opens social media, not because it is needed, but because the hand has been conditioned. Someone reaches for sugar, not because the body lacks nourishment, but because the nervous system remembers stimulation. This is why unconscious living feels so mechanical, almost like being a robot. But there is another possibility. The same science that explains conditioning also reveals something very profound. Conditioned responses can weaken when the unconscious pattern is no longer fed. We turn the problem on its head. If the bell rings repeatedly without food arriving, eventually the dog stops salivating. Awareness works in a very similar way. When you observe cravings without immediately obeying it, something extraordinary begins happening. The neural pathway weakens. The unconscious association starts dissolving. And this is why witnessing is so powerful. Because you insert a pause that interrupts automation without even suppressing the desire. Of course, this takes patience. However, if observation remains steady, the old conditioning ultimately loses strength. Awareness brings discrimination, clarity. One begins sensing directly. This nourishes. This depletes. This creates harmony. This creates disturbance. And suddenly life becomes intelligent again. Food habits change naturally. Media consumption changes naturally. Relationships change naturally. Not through any forced morality, not through discipline alone, but because awareness restores sensitivity. Then eating is no longer compulsive. Scrolling is no longer hypnotic. Pleasure is no longer addictive. And perhaps this is the greatest freedom, to live without being unconsciously pulled by every conditioned impulse. This is because the real prison was never the object itself. The prison was unconscious repetition. Meditation begins breaking this cycle, this invisible chain, by illuminating the mind without fighting it. The bell may still ring, but awareness no longer rushes like a hungry dog. And in that silent space between impulse and action, freedom is born.